Thank you very much, Di, and welcome everyone this morning. What we're planning to do this morning is run through the latest developments in the Oilseed Herbicides Think Water Stewardship campaign. So taking you through the presentation this morning, there's myself. So I'm Alison Hall, and I'm Stewardship Lead for ADAMA in the UK, as well as being a member of the Oilseed Think Herbicide Steering Group. But I'm very happy that we're joined today by the new VI chairman, Paul Temple, and he's going to run through the stewardship approaches very much from a farmer perspective, because as well as being chair of the VI since September last year and also chair of the HTB Oilseeds and Cereals Board, Paul is himself a tenant farmer in the northeast of England, where he farms a variety of crops, and he's also a registered spray operator, which gives him a really hands-on perspective to the stewardship, which hopefully you'll find useful as we go through that this morning. But just to reiterate a few points of housekeeping, as Di's already said, you will be muted throughout the webinar, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you can use the chat box to do that, send those through, and we'll try and address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, if you have any problems during the webinar, just pop your comments into the chat box and we'll do our best to try and help you out. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just quickly run through the background in terms of why we initiated the stewardship campaign. As I'm sure you're aware, there are a number of drinking water safeguard zones across Britain. And of those safeguard zones, you can see the map there on the right-hand side of the screen. 127 at latest count were at risk from pesticides. So these obviously, they're drinking water, they're areas of surface water, which we need to take extra precautions in terms of minimising the levels of pesticide getting into the water. Now, of those areas, and moving over to the left-hand side here, you can see there's a number that are at risk due to some of the major active substances that are used in oilseed rape. So this includes metazoclor, quinmerit, chlorpyrrolide, carbetamide, and propyzamide. And although actually, in fact, propyzamide is probably the most frequently detected of those pesticides in water, we know from our conversations with water companies that it is in fact quinmerit and chlorpyrrolide that are harder to get out of the water. But so all of these active substances are important. It's important that we make sure they're kept out of water, and it's also important that we maintain their use for the oilseed rape growers, because these are all very important in terms of controlling weeds, and in particular in terms of blackgrass control in an oilseed rape crop, taking an integrated crop management approach. So what are we doing about this? Well, the voluntary initiative is spearheading work with the water companies and also across the agricultural sector in order to raise the awareness of this issue and also promote and encourage best practice oilseed rape agronomy to help us both protect water and also these important active substances for the farmers. And this is all being done underneath the umbrella of the Oilseed Rape Herbicides Think Water Stewardship campaign. And one point I wanted to highlight was really the breadth of the involvement of different organisations and people in this campaign. So we're very happy that water companies are involved in this. So we've got Affinity Water, Anglian Water and Northumbrian Water, who are all actively involved in this campaign, as well as agronomist organisations such as the AICC and the AIC, farmer organisations, the NFU, and then of course pesticide manufacturers and the Crop Protection Association. So I think one of the great strengths of this stewardship is the integration of all these key organisations in the campaign. But before we go into the nitty-gritty of the campaign, another point I wanted to highlight is Metazoclor Matters, because this is an initiative you may well have heard of. It was set up by ADAMA and BSF back in 2015 with the objective to help to to protect water specifically from metazoclor and quinmeric-based oilseed rape herbicides. Now, I think it's probably quite clear is that there's a distinct overlap between what we were trying to do with metazoclor matters and then what we're trying to achieve with the oilseed rape herbicide stewardship campaign. So we thought it was very important to integrate these two, and that's what we've been doing this year, so that we can align the messages and hopefully simplify the messages for the water companies and also the agricultural industry, so that we've got, if you like, one set of stewardship for oilseed rape. So that's a bit of the background to the campaign. I want to move over to Paul to take us through some of the practical steps of oilseed rape stewardship.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking part in this. This is particularly unique, as I'm sure you're all aware of, and from a farming perspective, this year's dry weather has created a number of issues that I haven't sort of seen really since 1976. We've got really substantial cracks that have run through the process and very solid surfaces. And so when you look at the question, how can oilseed rape herbicides get into water? Well, they have more avenues this year than probably for a number of years because of the dry weather. And it's something that I think is really important for agronomists and farmers to be hugely aware of when we're actually looking at the sources both from the farm and the field sources. And the field sources particularly, where you can have runoff from a rain event now, will be a real issue. This is all about minimizing what actually happens and thinking about the process. So if we move on to the next slide, and there is always this an acronym. The first step a farmer can take to actually help this is genuinely identify whether your land is in a drinking water safeguard zone, and they're going to do this by either talking to a catchment officer, a local water company, or an agronomist. And then it's about implementing the best practice. Next slide. What I want to show you now is actually how I managed to do it myself. I simply went on to this website, the YB website, and followed the very simple instructions from a postcode onwards, and it pulled up this map, and you can sort of see from that point in the middle of the map exactly where I am. And actually, farmers are really curious to know exactly where they are, and when they do know where they are and can see it, they are more likely to approach the problem from awareness and wanting to solve it than if they don't. I certainly found in a training, a half-day training event that sprayer operators often go through now, that when the operators had a local water company's catchment officer there talking about what they were finding, they were really interested because they could feel a sense of responsibility. Next slide, please. Now, moving on from those maps, we are slowly having more detailed maps being made available. And this is where it's really important about either talking to local catchment officers to understand a risk on a field-by-field basis, or obviously with the agronomist. And as you can see, especially from the picture on the right, the risk in those fields is quite different from field to field. And actually, how you deal with that risk will be determined by, obviously, the areas of red. So rather than just sort of having a broad brush approach of possibly putting margins all the way around the outside to a certain width, actually, there's certain areas of those fields that present a greater risk. Now, that conversation between the farmer and the agronomist or the local catchment officer will actually develop ideas and strategies and areas of minimizing that risk. And having these kind of maps are the useful kind of things in a practical way to actually stimulate that conversation that we haven't had in the past. The next slide, please. Next slide. So it is about a simple thought process. This isn't something that literally takes hours. And here are the 3 steps to help minimize that risk of the herbicides reaching the watercourses. Obviously, you manage your tram lines, pathways, gateways. Ensure all surface water adjacent to oilseed fields is protected by at least a 6-meter vegetative buffer strip. And that final step, before making applications, refer to the product, and I'm going to come back to that point. So the next slide, please. So this is what farmers often do in a really practical way, and actually most of these steps actually benefit the growing of the crop. The use of low ground pressure tires is really important in helping the soil, increasing the tramline spacing from 18 meters to 24, and increasingly that is going to 28 and 36 meters. That actually just reduces that risk of having those tram lines within the field. Matching tire pressures to tire operation and axle load. A little bit of thought process around matching tires and the kind of pressures within those tires can pay real dividends for obviously preventing the surface water runoff, but actually from the soil as well. And as farmers become more aware, they're more willing to try different techniques out. Again, avoid establishing tram lines on loose soils or when soil is wet is a really simple point. And creating headline tram lines that are not connected to others also serves as an additional buffer. Maybe not the easiest of things to do, but thinking about where these tram lines connect is something that, you know, a farmer can possibly do something about it. And again, one of the obvious ones is to avoid drilling tram lines that go up and down the steepest parts of the field. Now, that's maybe not the easiest, but linked in with headlands and margins, you can make a difference. And the final one is sort of a process that increasingly farmers are adopting as they get access to accurate satellite technology, and that's controlled traffic farming, so that you actually keep the machinery in the same place each time and improve the soils as a result of that by not traveling all over it. Next slide, please. So obviously, ensuring surface water adjacent to oilseed rape fields is protected is the most important part. By at least 6 meters of vegetative buffer strip, and actually preferably by more than that. Now, grass is the more usual option in this situation, but actually with a little bit of thought process, you can make real benefits by putting in flower mixes and enhancing the access of pollen to the pollinators that are so important. The thought process for the buffer strip should actually begin before sowing the oilseed rape crop. So really, if we can get in the minds of farmers and agronomists and catchment officers, let's look at solving a problem a year in advance. We can do the planning and put those buffers in place before we actually grow the crop to gain the most benefit from it. And that final point on the bottom, the environmental land management, that will be a real opportunity in future schemes to sort of encourage and properly reward these buffer strips in a more proactive way. Next slide, please. With all the products that arrive on a farm, they come with these kind of labels, the advice sheets that belong to each product. And the smart thing really is to get into the practice and encourage farmers and operators to read these long before they actually need them, and to have a conversation with agronomists or catchment officers so they fully understand some of the technical detail that, you know, for such as myself as a farmer and an operator, might not be obvious, so that we are aware of the high risk areas and aware of how these products can sort of impact and how we can make the best steps to minimize risk. And doing it before we actually need the product is the most sensible way of carrying it out. I'm going to pass you back to Alison now.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. I just wanted to highlight one further aspect of the Oilseed Rape Think Herbicides Think Water campaign. So Paul's taken us through the different steps that we're promoting in terms of the conversations between agronomists, water companies, farmers to understand those risks. But we're also working closely with the water company partners within the scheme to actually look at how this can be implemented in practice. So there are 3 pilot catchments, one being managed by Affinity Water, one by Anglian and one by Northumbrian. And the idea is that within these specific catchments, we're going to have a look at how the stewardship is working. Both from a water quality perspective, are we getting those improvements that we're aiming for in terms of water quality and managing the risks of the pesticides getting into drinking water, but also from a farmer practicality viewpoint, so we can understand what's working well, what integrates well within the farming system, what can be improved. So this is one further aspect of the campaign that we're working on within the organisations involved in the steering group. So that is broadly where we're at in terms of the oilseed rape herbicides think water campaign. And just finally, I'm going to quickly run through some of those key points again that Paul has already talked about in more detail. So firstly, what are we trying to say? We're really encouraging farmers to identify whether their land is in a high-risk area for oilseed rape herbicides. Is it in a water safeguard zone? And promoting the use of YB to do that. But as we're aware, it's more complex than that. It's not just whether you're in a safeguard zone, but it's about understanding the risks of the different fields. And this is where we're promoting that conversation between the farmers, the agronomists, the water companies, so that we can think about where those actions to protect water are most relevant to the farm. And then when we've identified the locations, it's about what do we do? It's about the appropriate action. So we're promoting best practice agronomy, which minimises the risk of surface water to runoff. And as Paul explained, is often good practice anyway. It works well in a farm and for the oilseed rape crop anyway. And we're also promoting a vegetative buffer strip of at least 6 metres, but then going back to the field by field idea may well be relevant to be wider than that, 12 metres, maybe even 24 metres. And then finally, where herbicides are being used as part of that integrated weed control approach, to make sure that best practice is followed by looking at the water protection advice sheets and also the best practice on the product labels. So those are broadly the messages that we're promoting through the stewardship campaign. But of course, there's always plenty of detail behind that. And if you want more information, I very much recommend going to the VI website, or you can do that via the link there, the oilseed rape herbicides link. There's more general information about best practice in the VI's Check It Out tool, as well as specific information around the oilseed rape herbicides. So that is all that we wanted to say today, but we're very happy to take any questions. So if you could just, again, type those into the chat box and we can take those. But while we're just waiting for those to come through, one thing I did want to ask Paul is I know you're involved in one of the catchment meetings already, and what was your experience of that?
Yes, thank you, Alison. I visited one that was effectively being organised by Affinity Water at Mimshall Brook, and it was really, I found it a very rewarding experience. I had no knowledge of this before. There was a real farmer enthusiasm for it. It was a voluntary scheme, and there was a 96% engagement within the area that they were tackling. There was some very simple financial incentives there. And the way the water company and the farmers worked together, I thought was a real positive way of dealing with the problem. And actually, they were building on the experience from the first year and moving into a second year where there was a higher incentive, but with a more demanding targets being set. And it was both being seen as to be fair from both sides. What was really useful for me, I'd never visited a water treatment plant, and I have to say it was one of the most useful experiences of this year. because then you see at first hand the kind of pressure there is from on the water companies to supply ever more water. And I have to say, through this year's summer drought, I have often been thinking of the kind of problems that they are going to face. So it was really useful to see it and see how they'd set it up.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That's very helpful. We've got a couple of questions come through, so if I could maybe read those out. We've got a question here. Is any specific extra advice planned for this year, given the fact we're heading into autumn with potentially cracked soils and fast roots through soils and into drains? And that's something you referred to at the beginning of your part of the presentation, Paul. Is there anything you're able to add to that?
Well, other than the kind of conversations we have with agronomists, particularly, they are aware of it, and it is being raised. This is a problem that is here and now. The next important thing is to get farmers to appreciate this as well, through the way they either cultivate the land or work the land, and at what point they then subsequently employ any herbicides.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And we've got another question come through here. How do you set up headland tram lines so they do not connect to the tram lines in the centre of the field? Quite a practical question there. Can you help with that one?
It is. I think the most relevant part to headland tram lines is actually the point of entry. So obviously you're going to have a connection around the headland and into the field. If you can specifically avoid putting that entry into the field at the lowest point, you will prevent that immediate route of water running out through those wheelings. And a bit is about the thought process behind where you start and finish your work. You can, if it gets really bad, and we have done it on occasions, create an additional headland tram line within a field if we've had a particular bad headland where you sort of cause rutting and damage, so that you don't compound the problem.
Okay, thank you. And we've got another question come through. The question is around whether there's been any preparation for the upcoming neonics ban and the impact that may have on the use of other products such as propyzamide, with regard to proactive messages to farmers.
There's obviously a real problem sort of being stored on the neonics. That's a slightly different issue to the herbicide thing. But in a sense, what that highlights is the range of challenges that are faced by both agronomists and farmers as they're losing products. And I think what that really does is actually enhance the need for two things. One, a sense of professionalism as for our sprayer operators and agronomists, and we genuinely have some of the best in the world, and having the ROSA membership is really important. And two is, how do we develop the IPM approach, the integrated pest management, so that we look at a range of things rather than just single solutions that come out of a can. And that's why when I mentioned the environmental land management in the future, that we can build sort of things that actually help solve problems and enhance the environment, and actually a part of integrated plant management. So it's going to be a range of things, and it's the kind of thing that we will sort of enter into discussions either individually with an agronomist on their usually weekly visits this time of year, or we can do on a broader scale through conferences and through farming publications.
Okay, brilliant. And we've got another question come through here. How do farmers react to the suggestion of a 24-metre buffer, and can they be compensated?
If it was uncompensated, I can say it would be with genuine horror. But again, it depends on the problem and exactly on a field-by-field basis how you see solving a problem. So if you've got a perfectly level field with no watercourses for miles around, there is absolutely no need for a 24-metre barrier. If you've got a steeply sloping field that runs up to a watercourse, then obviously you've got a far greater pressure on that. The key to this is the discussion between water catchment officers and agronomists and the farmers. And one of the possible solutions will be within a locality and on a broader sense is how do we make the best use of future environmental land management?
Okay, brilliant. And I think we've got one final question here. Does the campaign recommend the use of tramline disruptors?
Tramline disruptors, is that right?
Yes, tramline disruptors, that's right.
I think if they work in certain circumstances, they're fine. Again, it comes down to your own situation. The main thing to do, and actually tramline shouldn't be a problem sort of depth and seedling wise at this particular point in the growing season, because we've got dry soils. And with dry soils, you don't tend to put that soil damage in at the beginning. It's with a wet soil that you'll get the rutting of the soil and the sealing. Probably the biggest challenge at the moment is just exactly the full understanding of how water, if we get heavy rain events, will run across the soil or into the soil, and just exactly how deep do some of these cracks go into that soil level. And that, to my mind at the moment, is a key understanding. But whatever works in the circumstance should be employed. Okay, thank you. And actually, we do have another question come through, which is, are the stewardship messages being promoted beyond the pilot catchments and websites? And if so, by what means? Perhaps this is something that I can take on. So obviously we're using means like what we're doing today in terms of the webinar to get the messages out there. And really, I would say we're also asking you as water catchment people, and also we've done a similar webinar with agronomists. We're asking agronomists really to cascade these messages out to farmers. We had this conversation earlier, Paul and myself, about the best way to get these kind of messages to farmers. I mean, perhaps you'd like to say something about that, Paul. Well, it does work, I think, best with farmers when they can relate it to either their own farm or their own locality, because genuinely they do not want to be seen as causing a problem to water. So that's why when I saw that the farmers with the catchment officer and looking at the levels that she was finding, they found that really interesting and wanted to do something about it. When they visited the water treatment centre, all of a sudden the issue became a really live one to them, and appealing to the sense of I don't want to waste money. When it's put to them that if you put a product on that's expensive and it actually doesn't do its job but runs off, you're simply wasting money. So we've got a variety of messages to put across to farmers, and we can do it on a variety of levels. We can do it through the press, we can do it at events like cereals, we can do it through sprayer training, and I certainly think we can do it on that local level. There's a number of routes, and we've got to keep working hard at it. Yeah, and I should say we're using all those routes in terms of the events like cereals, in terms of the press, in terms of social media, working through all the different organisations that are involved in the campaign. So, and also we really value your help as well in getting those messages out there. So thank you very much. I think that's the last question come through, but if anything comes up following the webinar, do get in touch and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. So I just want to thank you for joining today, and also to let you know that we have been recording the webinar, so we'll be able to send you a recording a bit later this morning. So if there are any colleagues that you're aware of who missed this, who may be interested, do feel free to forward that. I'll close the webinar there, but I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us. Thank you in particular to Paul for running through the stewardship from a farmer perspective, and hope you will have a great morning. Thank you. Bye.